Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the
FAIRtax
FAIRtax Guys. All right.
Hey, buddy.
I tell you what, good job again on talking to Jonathan Mitchell last week. That was a really interesting interview.
I'm noticing a trend of folks that are running, especially in the primaries. They're young. They have a job of some significance, not necessarily an attorney. They're hardworking Americans, individuals with sort of an idea that things need to get upgraded when it comes to representation at our nation's capital. And last week's guy is on the money. Hard worker. We of course can't endorse a candidate, and I hope that folks will go back and look at that episode and review, especially the ones that we are talking to, people that we are able to get to sign the FAIRtax pledge, to learn more about them and then follow and get engaged in the process now before the primaries. Choose the best candidate. And of course, we feel that the candidate who is supporting the FAIRtax should be considered with boldness and great expectation. They've done a lot of research. There are a lot of questions that still are to be asked, as we know, as folks begin to understand how the FAIRtax works. We know that the people that they're talking to, they're folks that they're going to be representing possibly, have a lot of questions. And some of the interviews going forward will reveal exactly what I'm talking about, that people are now going, this might actually be a pretty good thing. The FAIRtax.
Well, you've got another interview on next week's FAIRtax Power Radio setup with a guy that you said was on the FAIRtax marketplace. Now that should be good as well.
He goes at the end of the interview. We didn't talk about it during the interview, and I hope maybe one day we'll be able to get him back on. But he raises his arm up like this, and he says, "See this right here?" And of course, I don't have a watch on, but he's going to be selling watches on the marketplace and getting that set up even as we speak. It's happening right now. So FAIRtaxmarketplace.com.
All right. Well, we have it for the past couple of weeks. We had Jade, Walle on a couple of weeks ago. Then you had Jonathan Mitchell last week. We haven't had time to do my favorite thing, dig into congress.gov and see what the Congress critters are up to. And we've got lots of hits here. Actually, I didn't write down the number, so you'll have to forgive me. It's up over 1,300, no doubt. But back into congress.gov to see what the Congress critters are up to with the tax code. And the first item on today's list is H.R. 5747. It's to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to include certain over-the-counter dietary supplement products as qualified medical expenses. Do you think there's a lobbyist behind that one?
Can't imagine that would be the case, Bob.
I think you need to imagine again, because
as a matter of fact, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and go, you know what? The lobbyists are involved in pretty much everything that takes place around the tax code in most cases.
So again, qualified medical expenses, which are deductible to the degree that they exceed a certain percentage of your gross income. So really only the people that have a pretty good chunk of medical expenses get to take that deduction. But you can add to it by buying certain over-the-counter dietary supplement products if H.R. 5747 becomes law. How cool.
Mercy.
All right, let's try another one. S3091, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to establish the Advanced Solar Manufacturing Production Credit. There we go. Tax code picking winners and losers in the private sector economy again.
And the whole thing is that it encourages a certain activity, economic activity, which may not have happened in a free market, and won't let the process, run its course from development to market and failure or success. And it kind of taints the American entrepreneurial spirit a little bit. It sort of guides somebody in this direction as opposed to going in the direction that they might have gone in. And it may be successful or not.
Make no mistake about it. I think solar energy is wonderful. Living down here in Florida, we've got lots of it. So I'm for all the above when it comes to making solar energy. But I'm also a free market guy. If this cannot survive in the free marketplace without the government propping it up, then maybe it's not something that consumers demand to the degree that they should be using our tax money for it.
Exactly. And I've noticed, by the way, that the sun does seem larger in Florida for some reason.
It is. Well, let's move along here. S3081, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to permit withdrawals from certain retirement plans for repayment of student loan debt and for other purposes. So again, the tax code telling you what you can do with your own money.
Hey, I can't figure it out by myself. I need the federal government to help me. Yeah.
Okay, now see if you can figure this one out. This is HR 5734 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to establish a system for the taxation of catastrophic risk transfer companies to ensure sufficient capital to cover catastrophic insurance losses and for other purposes, i.e., let's tax these guys so they'll have enough money to do what they're supposed to be doing.
Unbelievable.
You can't make that stuff up. It's right there on congress.gov.
It's amazing. And folks, if you have a lot of time like Bob and I do, you can sit around and go to your favorite search engine and go to congress.gov and click into the search bar there and find all of this information out and just look at some of the ideas that come through the pipeline.
Yeah,
thankfully,
you go to Congress. Yeah, go to congress.gov, enclose the words Internal Revenue Code in quotes there in that search bar at the top of the page. Make sure you've only got current legislation, 117th Congress, legislation only. And I'd say I didn't write down the number, but it's well over 1,300 hits at this point, I'm sure. We'll check it out in a bit later. But this is my favorite one that we came across. You ready for this? This is HR 5704, which is entitled, are you ready?
Yeah.
The Gig is Up Act.
Has something to do with flounder fishing in an inlet somewhere?
I don't think so. I think that has to do with the gig economy, they're calling it, when people are working as independent contractors as opposed to employees of certain companies. Right. And independent contractors are not subject to tax withholding from their compensation, what they get. And this HR 5704, the gig is up. They say we're going to get the gig economy here and modify the Internal Revenue Code to require payroll tax withholding of independent contractors of certain large businesses. How cool is that?
That's hey, you know what? All you have to do is get the fair tax enacted, and all of these things that we talk about here with congress.gov just go by the wayside. They're no longer relevant. Oh, it's just, I mean, but what are we going to do when the fair tax is enacted? Are we going to like do like the oldies but the goodies, congress.gov? Do you remember back in 1999 when Congress proposed? What's that going to be like?
I have been compiling a 2021 tax proposal hall of shame that we'll go over on one of our end of year programs here at the end of 2021 coming up here. Actually, just not too awfully long from now, a few weeks.
Yeah, we'll be there before you know it.
But again, congress.gov, look, Internal Revenue Code in quotes, search on that and find all the crazy things the Congress critters are doing. We'll get into more of that probably in 2 weeks from today, because we'll be talking to Mike Saliva, another Fair Tax candidate pledge signer, next week on Fair Tax Power Radio. But let's move on. As we've always mentioned here, and we will continue to mention, that we always encourage listeners to send in questions about the fair tax. We've got some, pretty good knowledge in our heads to start with. We've got access to some other really knowledgeable people about the fair tax. And we got a question from a gentleman named Steve. He called himself Swamper77, I guess, is his little screen name or whatever. And he was asking, now dig this, how is the child of separated parents counted for the prebate? Now, he's contending that the prebate should be prorated, based on how much financial support the child receives from each parent. And we've got a thing in the actual fair tax bill that addresses his question. Yeah. I'm not sure it's exactly what he wants to hear, but it is the way it is in the fair tax bill.
And of course, I would guess that when the fair tax bill goes and actually is debated, there are some things that might change. But here's what it says: children of divorced or separated parents. If a child's parents are divorced or legally separated, a child, for the purpose of this chapter, shall be treated as part of the qualified family of the custodial parent. So the parent who the child comes home to every day after school.
Yeah, the parent who the court gave custody to gets to claim the child as a member of their household for the prebate. But there's a bit more. Joint custody cases.
Yes, parent shall be entitled to entitled to be treated as the custodial parent pursuant to this paragraph may release this claim to the other parent if said release is in writing. So, if you have an amicable divorce, possibly that credit could end up being in the tally of the other parent.
Yeah, and it says in the case of joint custody like that, the custodian who has the child for the majority of the calendar year is the one that gets to claim the. I believe that's pretty much the same as for claiming a child as a dependent on your income tax at the moment. But
yeah, right. That's correct.
So the FAIRtax kind of handles that the same way. And as I say, that's a subject that can be debated when and if they will ever vote this thing out of committee onto the House floor where they can debate it and amendments can be offered to it. But that's how it is right now. Now you got another really.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to make a comment that.
Yeah, go ahead.
The way we get this thing cranking up is everybody that's listening. And I've said this, and I'll actually echo one of our interviews in just a minute about what to do next. But talk to 5 of your friends. Just put a list down. You're sitting there having a cup of coffee in the morning and say, I know 5 people. Some people do. I don't. I know maybe 2. Bob Paxton. But call 5 people and get in a routine to do that. And Mike Saliba said, well, why don't you have those 5 people call the Congress, call their representative, and sometimes 5 phone calls on the same subject matter will dislodge them, or their associates in the office there in Washington will say, "Hey, Representative Hofnagel, we have 5 people calling in about this FAIRtax thing. We need to take a look at this." So it's always good. You want to move this thing along. It's time to make the phone calls to your representatives. And also do what a lot of people are doing is considering running for office and using the FAIRtax as an issue or a platform for your campaign. Yeah, these questions are great from our viewers and listeners, and we sure do appreciate the engagement. Sure.
One other thing, right quick, I haven't had to mention in a couple of weeks is the FAIRtax 500. We want to get FAIRtax 500. FAIRtax volunteers at the next CPAC. Right. And we still don't know if it's going to be in Florida or DC, but if you have 500 people walking around in front of all the media that's there, plus all of the political types that are there, that would have to make an impact. But let's move on. We got another really good question from a listener.
All right, Daryl Eldridge has written questions. I have a question about the FAIRtax to which I haven't found an answer yet. To be clear, I am a huge fan, but I wonder if I've found a downside that may give others an argument against the FAIRtax. So he continues, at the moment that the FAIRtax takes effect, all of the money that I have on hand will have already been subject to the income tax. Then when I spend it, I'll pay taxes on it again. Isn't this double taxation? Does the FAIRtax plan have any provision to exempt money that has already been taxed? Even if I have to pay taxes twice, I think the benefits of the FAIRtax are far and away worth it. But I'd like to know how you would respond to the objection. Interesting. Okay. I've never thought about money in hand,
A couple of things. I like the sentiment, even if I have to pay taxes twice, I think it's a great idea and I'm still in favor of it. Couple of things that come to mind immediately to this question. I would take issue somewhat with his contention that on the moment that the FAIRtax becomes law, all of the money that I have on hand has already been taxed or subject to the income tax. There are 2 particular instances I can think of where that's not true. The first, of course, are these tax deferred retirement accounts. Right. If you got a 401k or a 403b or any kind of non-Roth IRA account, the money that you have stashed away in that account has not been taxed yet. So the name of the game is tax deferred, so that you would pay taxes when you draw it out rather than when you put it in. And so any money that you have in a retirement account has not been subject to the income tax. And then when you draw it out under the FAIRtax, there's no tax penalty at the time. It's taxed only when you spend it. So that money would only be taxed once. No problem at all there.
Interesting. I see what you're talking about. And those Roth IRAs, non-taxable, I mean, everything basically becomes your money. saved, it's saved, whether it's in the Roth IRA or if it's in a savings account or in stocks and bonds or money markets, et cetera. It's all your money saved.
Okay. The other instance I can think of money that you would have on hand that has not been subject to the income tax on the day the fair tax becomes law would be any unrealized capital gains you've got. If you own stocks or bonds or real estate or precious metals or stuff like that, any capital investment, you pay tax only on the appreciation in value of that asset while you hold it. So anytime if you say you bought a stock for $150 and it's worth $200 today, that is $50 that you've got that has not been taxed yet. And again, under the current law, would not be taxed until you actually sell that asset and receive the money. So any unrealized capital gain you have at this point will not have been taxed, when the fair tax takes effect. And again, that money will be taxed just once, only when you draw it out and spend it on the retail purchase of new goods and services.
Right. I think this is probably one of the best questions that I've come across, and you can tell that Daryl has really dug in, and I think that's the key. There's a cursory response to the fair tax that most people say, what are you going to do about taking care of lower income, and what if I what if I buy $1 million yacht, or what if I don't buy anything? And a lot of people are, have come to a misunderstanding about the fair tax simply because of it's the fair tax. And then you talk about the flat tax and really only changing 2 letters in the name. And people get confused a lot because it seems to me sometimes that the flat tax gets talked about more in news media and conversations in public. There's a confusion there that some people have, but here's Daryl coming at us with this great observation that I think has really helps nail down. And maybe there's some things, and maybe this becomes part of the debate when the fair tax finally makes its way out of committee and gets debated on the floor of the House.
Yeah, well, he raises fairly an interesting question here about the double taxation. My income has already been taxed, and it's going to be taxed again when I spend it under the fair tax. What he apparently doesn't realize, and a lot of other people don't realize, is you're already being double taxed under the current system. The money that you get, is subject to the income tax. You get this withholding out of your paycheck. But then when you go buy something, any retail product or service, part of the price of that product is the tax liability and compliance costs that are being passed along to you. Now, for example, think of it this way. The money you pay for a haircut is taxable income to your barber. Okay. So part of what you hand over for a haircut ends up at the IRS as the barber's income tax. And part of what you handed over to the barber for a haircut is money that's already been taxed once. So it's being taxed again. With the fair tax, it's just a little bit more out in the open. With the income tax, it's hidden from you. And that's nasty. But, when you have the fair tax, this double taxation that's going to continue anyway is going to be a lot more apparent to you, because you'll see the receipt on your receipt will have the fair tax amount and everything. But there's one other thing really quick. He asked, is there a provision to exempt money that's already been taxed? The short answer to that is no, but there is a really interesting provision in the fair tax that I really hadn't thought up a great deal. We mentioned a lot, this is just then, that the prices of the goods and services we buy today contain the embedded cost of the income tax in their retail prices. So think of a car dealer that has, $1 million worth of cars on his lot on the day the fair tax becomes law. Now, the retail prices of those cars contain the embedded cost of the current tax system.
Correct.
And so when the fair tax becomes law and that car dealer has to add the fair tax in on top of the retail price that already contains the embedded cost of the other system, hope I'm not getting too complicated here. That way you could really get killed. But there is a provision in the fair tax bill called the inventory credit. So what it basically does, it works kind of like the refund that manufacturers get in European countries when they produce goods for the export market. The government refunds back to them all of the VAT tax
Right.
that is
So they
included
get
in
the
this
credit,
one.
inventory credit that way.
Yeah. So the fair tax bill will give a credit to this car dealer, which will in effect erase out the embedded cost of the income tax system that's already in the retail price of the car. So the retail price of the car drops. And then when you add in the fair tax, then that retail price doesn't change much.
Yeah, and the dealer gets the same dollar amount that he would have gotten the day before the fair tax took effect. And then, but you would be paying the same price, not more, because of the inventory credit.
Yeah, the inventory credit effectively removes the cost of the embedded taxes that are in the retail price of that car as it exists the day before the fair tax becomes law. And then when the dealer takes that credit and reduces the cost of the car when the fair tax becomes law, adds the fair tax back in, to the consumer, it's going to be pretty close to a wash on that one. So yeah,
Right.
that's something that a lot of folks hadn't thought of. I really hadn't thought of. And until Daryl brought that question up, I kicked it over to Jim Bennett, the gentleman that writes the Grassroots Corners. And
Yes.
he did an entire Grassroots Corner article on this very question about the inventory credit.
Nice.
So I would direct people to FAIRtax.org and see if they can find the inventory credit Grassroots Corner episode to do that. But that's a great question. I love to get questions like this from listeners. So if
I mean, you have to stop and think about it. Why does the earth spin this way? And why do the stars come out at night? And how come what happens the day before the fair tax is enacted and the day after the fair tax is enacted? And you have to stop and think. And this is the great thing about it is people are starting to dig in to specific questions like this, which means, hey, people are out there thinking about it as a real possibility, even more so than maybe yesterday or the day before, that the fair tax can make a difference in people's lives, in their pocketbooks, in the way our government works, and also in the method of taxation that will supercharge our economy over the long haul. And big thing is, hey, it puts us back in charge, puts the money on our hip. We get to decide when we pay our taxes.
Yeah, I've also got to credit Kerry Bowers. I wrote to him and asked him, for some details on how this inventory credit worked, and he just basically confirmed what Jim had said, that it's a credit that a seller gets that offsets the embedded taxes that are in the prices of the products that they have in inventory on the day that the fair tax becomes law. Right. And of course, as that inventory is sold off, then you only get the credit on the stuff that was in inventory beforehand. Then replacement inventory was produced under the fair tax without those embedded costs coming at you. For the consumer, though, it just means it's going to be very little difference between the fair tax and the income tax system as far as what they pay the retail prices.
This is great. I just love it. And, I just popped into the FAIRtax marketplace because this can be a place where vendors, anybody can come on and with your product or even service and not only help out the FAIRtax movement, but you can make some money yourself in a commerce way where you are being shopped for by folks who are encouraging the fair tax to be implemented. FAIRtaxmarketplace.com. And there might even one day might be a way you can buy a car on there. I would think that would be possible, wouldn't you? I mean, hey, I'd spend money with somebody who's on the FAIRtax marketplace selling cars right now. Hell, excuse my French, Carvana is out there selling stuff online. How about let's come up with a way to sell cars on FAIRtaxmarketplace.com.
Yeah, and again, if people aren't familiar with the concept, the FAIRtax marketplace site itself is just somewhat like the mall. You walk into the mall, and as you look around, there are all different kinds of stores. So there will be a number of different vendors will have a presence on that FAIRtax marketplace store. And anytime you click through, little high-tech term there, you click through to a vendor's website from the marketplace, then that vendor knows that sale came through the marketplace, and they will give back a percentage of their sale to the fair tax. And it's a win-win for everybody. You get what you're going to buy anyway, and the fair tax gets a little kickback from it to help advance the cause.
Absolutely. And like I said, as I've taken on the mantle of Ron Malero and replacing Ron here, and God rest his soul and God bless his family and all he did for the FAIRtax while he was here. And, he's cheering down, seeing great progress being made. Our listeners are getting engaged. The folks that are throwing their hat in the ring for elected office are swarming around the FAIRtax. And a lot of it has to do with, with a continued drum beating of the benefits. But people are really sitting out there going, something's got to change. I can't see continuing to work, 40, 50, 60 hours a week and looking at all that might come out of my paycheck. They are really saying, and the young people are the ones that are really driving right now, the ones that are really making it go forward. And I'm encouraged by taking over part of the interview process with seeing these young faces on the other end of the interview. And I'm going, man, this is great. This is really, we're going to see it happen.
You'll be talking to one next week.
That's right.
Named Mike Saliba up in Michigan.
Up near Detroit, Michigan. Yeah, he's an excellent opportunity for y'all to really get to know some of the people that are running educationally. That's what we're doing here at FAIRtax Power Radio, is letting you know who's out there, that they're supporting the FAIRtax by signing the FAIRtax pledge. It makes us understanding that they've really done their homework and know what's getting ready to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned something being unsustainable. That brings to mind something that Jade Walle talked about here a couple of weeks with the national debt. Currently, $28.4 trillion worth of debt that we've got. And he says, and I agree with him, that is just not going to be sustainable for a whole lot longer. And the FAIRtax is going to be a really, really good way to address that. If you only consider the tax evasion part, $1 trillion a year is being evaded, which the FAIRtax would collect. So even, right there, just about the entire deficit is wiped out single-handedly by the FAIRtax.
Yes, I love it. I mean, and again, we always use the phrase, once you understand it, you'll demand it. And absolutely. And I see that happening, like with the 2 letters that we got, that we talked about this week. Folks are really digging in and talking about what the possibilities are and asking questions that are deep within the way the FAIRtax is written and how it will be presented when it comes to committee and gets to the House floor to be voted on and debated.
Okay, well, again, any questions people may have, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com is our email address. You can leave us comments on our Facebook page. You can leave comments on our YouTube and Rumble videos. And I'm afraid that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. We're flat out of time again. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you again that the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
The FAIRtax is a tax replacement plan where we take all the federal income taxes, including corporate, personal, gift, and estate taxes, and replace them with one national consumption tax on new purchases above the poverty level only. This form of consumption tax comes with no exceptions and is progressive, not regressive. The poor are not paying more, and the rich are not paying less. What makes it progressive is that all Americans are untaxed up to the poverty level via the Prebate, much like your standard tax deduction. The taxes are collected by retail businesses at state level, so the system is more accountable. The IRS is done away with, and you have control over your money and what the overall tax rate your household pays. The FAIRtax is revenue neutral, so the government receives the same amount of money as they do now, and it's fair because you decide what's fair, not them. To learn more, visit FAIRtax.org and be sure to like us on social media to help educate your friends and spread the word.